She found me sitting in the rain, tears hidden in the downpour. Instead of questions, she offered me a place by her side, and with one quiet invitation, my world began to change. The night had turned heavier than I could bear. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the streetlights into soft halos, their glow scattering across the wet pavement. I sat there on the stone steps of the boarding house, my hands pressed against my knees, my head bowed. My shirt clung to me like a second skin, the cold biting through until it reached bone. But none of it compared to the heaviness inside me, the words I hadn't spoken to anyone, the weight I had carried too long. At 22, I should have felt like life was just beginning, yet here I was, unraveling under the pressure of it. Rejections piling up, expectations too high, a quiet loneliness that seemed to stretch endlessly. I tried to hide the tears behind the rain, as if the storm could disguise the way my chest shook. But the truth was, I didn't want anyone to see me like this. Then came the sound of footsteps. Soft at first, muffled by the rain, then clearer as they drew near. I didn't look up immediately, shame held me there, eyes fixed on the glistening steps below me. But then her voice broke through, warm and steady, carrying with it something that stopped the storm inside me more than the one outside. "You'll get sick out here." I looked up, blinking against the water dripping into my eyes. She stood above me, an umbrella tilted in her hand, the rain sliding off its edges in neat little rivers. My landlady, a woman I'd seen countless times in passing, always composed, always graceful in a way that seemed untouchable. Yet now her gaze was steady on me, soft, concerned, as if she could see past the wet hair sticking to my forehead and the exhaustion etched into my face. The glow from the porch light framed her in gold against the storm. She didn't rush me, didn't demand an explanation. Instead, she crouched slightly, lowering the umbrella so it covered both of us. The sudden shelter was startling, the warmth of her presence wrapping around me in a way the thin fabric of my soaked shirt never could. "You shouldn't be sitting out here alone," she said, her voice quieter now, like she was speaking directly into the hollow space of my chest. For the first time all night, I felt the sting of tears not as a burden but as a release. And under her watchful eyes, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry everything alone. For a moment, I thought she might simply walk past, the way most people would, a glance, a flicker of pity, and then gone again. But she didn't. She stayed. Her umbrella tilted carefully, holding back the rain that had been soaking through my hair and dripping down my collar. The small act felt almost overwhelming, because it was more than kindness, it was presence, steady and unflinching, something I hadn't known I needed until that instant. "Come on," she said gently, crouching closer so her eyes could meet mine. "You can't sit out here like this. You'll catch cold." Her tone wasn't scolding. It was softer than that, almost like she was afraid that raising her voice might shatter me further. And yet, there was an authority to it, the kind of voice you found yourself wanting to obey, even when pride told you to resist. I swallowed hard, embarrassed to be seen in such a state. I wanted to brush it off, to say I was fine, but the lie clung to my tongue and refused to form. Instead, I sat frozen, rain still streaming down my back, until she reached out. Her hand came to rest on my sleeve, not heavy, just enough to let me feel the warmth of her touch seeping through the damp fabric. That simple connection broke something open inside me. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and all at once I felt the dangerous urge to lean into her steadiness. "Please," she added, her eyes searching mine. "Just come inside for a while. You don't have to explain anything." The porch light above us flickered softly, illuminating the droplets caught in her hair, turning them to tiny sparks of silver. Her face, so close now, carried no judgment, only patience, the kind that made me feel seen in a way I couldn't remember feeling for a long time. Still, I hesitated. Pride tangled with need, fighting in the hollow of my chest. To accept her invitation meant admitting my weakness, letting her witness the side of me I usually kept hidden. But as her thumb brushed lightly over the fabric of my sleeve, her touch warm against the chill, the decision began to make itself. I lifted my eyes to hers, and for a heartbeat too long we stayed like that, caught in a silence that felt thick with something unspoken. My pulse quickened. Her gaze didn't falter. Finally, I nodded. Her lips curved, not quite a smile but close, relief softening the line of her shoulders. She stood, offering me the shelter of her umbrella. And just like that, with rain still falling around us, I found myself following her inside. Crossing the threshold into her home felt strangely like stepping into another world. The storm was still raging outside, but the moment she shut the door behind us, the roar of the rain softened into a distant hum, like it belonged to a different life altogether. Warm light spilled from the lamps scattered around her living room. It wasn't overly decorated, not the kind of space designed to impress, it was lived in. Books lined the shelves unevenly, a few stacked sideways when the rows had run out of room. A knitted throw lay draped over the arm of the sofa, and the faint, soothing scent of chamomile hung in the air. She slipped the umbrella aside and set it carefully by the door. "Sit," she said gently, motioning toward the couch. Her presence filled the space without effort, composed, calm, quietly confident, and I felt clumsy in comparison, dripping water onto her rug. "I'm sorry," I murmured, glancing at the puddle forming beneath me. I didn't mean to. Before I could finish, she was already unfolding a soft blanket, the fabric warm from having been folded against itself. Without hesitation, she draped it around my shoulders. The gesture startled me more than the storm had. Her hands brushed my back lightly as she tucked it close, and I felt the contrast between her warmth and the chill that still clung to me. "It's just a rug," she said, dismissing my apology with a faint smile. "Don't worry about it." I sank onto the couch, the blanket cocooning me in its softness, and for the first time that night, my body stopped shivering. She moved gracefully toward the kitchen and returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea, the ceramic warm against my palms when she pressed one into my hands. As she lowered herself onto the cushion beside me, the space shifted. The couch wasn't small, but somehow her nearness made it feel closer, narrower. Our knees brushed, just the lightest touch, but the contact lingered, a quiet reminder that she was there, that I wasn't invisible in this moment. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, yes, but in a way that pulled me toward her rather than away. I studied the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the graceful way she wrapped her own hands around her cup, the steady rhythm of her breath. The storm tapped against the windows, but in here, it felt like another rhythm had taken over, one that pulsed quietly in the space between us. I didn't know what to call it, only that I didn't want it to end. For a while, we simply sat there, the tea warming my hands while the silence pressed in around us. She didn't push me to speak. She didn't demand answers or explanations. She just sat, close enough that the edge of her blanket brushed against mine, close enough that the faint scent of lavender drifted toward me whenever she shifted slightly. And maybe that was why the words finally started to rise. "It's just," my voice cracked, catching against the rawness in my throat. I paused, staring into the pale swirl of steam above my mug. "It feels like I keep running in place. Like no matter how hard I try, I can't get anywhere. Every door I knock on, it's just another rejection. And after a while, you start to wonder if maybe they're right about you. Maybe you're not enough." The confession hung there, heavier than the storm outside. My hand had gone rigid around the mug, fingers stiff, knuckles white. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Slowly, without a word, she reached across and laid her hand over mine. Her palm was warm, grounding. She didn't pry my fingers apart, but she let her thumb trace small, careful circles along the back of my hand until I loosened my grip. The release came with a tremor in my chest, as though her touch had unlocked something I'd been holding far too long. When I finally dared to lift my gaze, she was watching me. Not with pity, not with disappointment. There was something steadier there, something that made my throat ache even more. "You are enough," she said softly. For simple words, but they hit harder than anything else could have. Her voice carried a certainty I couldn't find in myself. I blinked quickly, but the tears still slipped free, hot against my cheeks. I tried to laugh it off, to cover the mess of emotion, but the sound broke halfway through, brittle and thin. And then, before I could retreat into shame, she leaned in. Not too close, not in a way that demanded anything of me. But enough. Enough that her eyes shimmered with shared ache, enough that her presence filled the empty spaces I'd been drowning in. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We simply breathed, the storm outside, her touch on my hand, my heart beating louder than it should. And in that silence, I realized something: sometimes it isn't the words that heal you. Sometimes, it's the way someone chooses to stay. After my words faded, after my chest had finally steadied under the rhythm of her touch, I expected the moment to close, for her to retreat, to leave my confessions hanging in the air like something fragile we weren't meant to speak of again. But she didn't. She stayed exactly where she was, her hand still resting lightly over mine. And then, in a quiet voice that seemed almost foreign on her lips, she said, "You know, it isn't just you." Her tone had changed. Softer, yes, but edged with something unguarded, something that made me lift my eyes quickly to her face. She wasn't looking at me at first. Her gaze had dropped to her own hands, fingers curling lightly against the porcelain mug in her lap. "People think I have it all figured out," she continued, almost like she was speaking to herself. "That because I'm older, I'm supposed to have all the answers, to be this steady anchor. But anchors get heavy too." The words caught me off guard. She had always seemed untouchable in my eyes, graceful, collected, her life appearing so firmly in place. And now, watching her shoulders curve inward ever so slightly, I realized how much weight she carried beneath that surface. "Do you ever get tired of it?" I asked quietly. Her lips curved, but not in a smile. It was smaller, sadder. "All the time. Sometimes I wonder if anyone really sees me, not the landlady, not the caretaker, not the woman who keeps everything running. Just me." Her honesty hung between us, delicate and raw. For the first time that night, the urge to comfort shifted from me to her. My hand moved almost on instinct, sliding across the narrow space between us until it found hers. My fingers brushed against her knuckles, tentative at first, as though I had no right to reach for her. But when she didn't pull away, when she turned her hand slightly and let her fingers lace gently with mine, something inside me steadied. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was tender. She exhaled slowly, as if the act of being held, even in such a small way, lightened her more than words ever could. "I don't usually say things like this," she admitted, her thumb brushing lightly over my hand now, mirroring what she'd done for me earlier. And in that simple reversal, I felt the weight between us shift. It wasn't just about her comforting me anymore, or me leaning on her. It was the quiet recognition that we had both been carrying more than we let on, and for the first time, neither of us was carrying it alone. The storm outside softened as the hours stretched on, its thunder retreating into the distance until only the gentle patter of rain remained. The living room seemed suspended in its own quiet world, a pool of warm lamplight, the faint tick of a clock, and the two of us sitting close enough that every small movement carried weight. We had stopped talking. Not out of discomfort, but because there was nothing more that needed to be said. Our earlier confessions lingered between us like threads woven too tightly to pull apart. She leaned back against the couch, her body relaxing into the cushions, the blanket slipping slightly as she shifted. Without a word, she adjusted it so it covered both of us. The gesture was subtle, almost casual, yet it changed everything. Her shoulder brushed against mine, and when she tilted her head just slightly, a strand of her hair grazed my arm. The touch was feather-light, but it set off a quiet shiver that had nothing to do with the chill I'd felt earlier. I tried to steady my breathing, but the more I focused on it, the more conscious I became of hers, slow, measured, carrying a softness that calmed me even as it set my nerves alight. The minutes stretched. I stared at the faint reflection of the lamplight in the window, though I saw nothing beyond it. All I could feel was her presence, the warmth radiating through the shared blanket, the way her hand, resting idly on her lap, was so close to mine that the space between our fingers felt charged. I wanted to speak. To tell her how much this meant to me, how much I saw her now in a way I hadn't before. But the words tangled in my chest, caught somewhere between fear and longing. What right did I have to reach for more, to risk disturbing the fragile balance we had found tonight? As if sensing the storm inside me, she moved first. Not with words, not with anything grand. She simply let her head tilt until it rested lightly against my shoulder. The weight of it was gentle, barely there, yet it anchored me more firmly than anything else could have. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Carefully, I shifted just enough so that the blanket tucked around her more snugly, protecting her from the last traces of the chill. She didn't stir, didn't move away. And so we stayed like that, two people sitting in silence, hearts speaking louder than voices, while midnight crept in quietly around us. I woke to stillness. The storm had passed sometime in the night, leaving the air washed clean, the sky beyond the curtains pale with early light. For a moment, I didn't recognize where I was. The blanket cocooned around me, the faint scent of lavender and chamomile, the quiet rhythm of another's breathing so close, it was all foreign and yet disarmingly safe. Then I turned my head and saw her. She was still beside me on the couch, her body curled slightly toward mine, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the blanket as though she'd kept it in place through the night. Strands of her hair caught the dawn light, glowing gold against the pillow of her arm. I froze, afraid that even the smallest movement might disturb the fragile peace of the moment. My chest tightened with something I couldn't name, not just gratitude, not just relief, but the quiet ache of realizing I'd been given more than comfort. I had been given presence, care, and the gift of not being left alone with myself. Carefully, I shifted, setting my empty mug aside and easing toward the edge of the couch. But before I could fully rise, her hand stirred. Her fingers brushed against mine, the lightest touch, and then her eyes opened slowly. She blinked against the morning brightness, her expression soft, her voice roughened by sleep when she whispered, "You're awake." I didn't mean to, I began, fumbling for words, but she shook her head gently. "You don't have to apologize," she murmured, her palm coming up to rest briefly against my cheek. The warmth of her touch startled me, not because it was unexpected, but because of the tenderness behind it. "You're not alone anymore." The words settled deep, filling places I hadn't realized were empty. I leaned slightly into her touch before she drew her hand back, and for a suspended moment, neither of us moved. The silence wasn't heavy this time, it was full, threaded with the quiet possibility of something neither of us dared name yet. Finally, she sat up slowly, smoothing the blanket, her composure returning like sunlight reclaiming the room. I followed her lead, rising carefully, but before stepping away, I turned back. "Thank you," I said softly. My voice cracked on the second word, and she must have heard more in it than just gratitude, because her eyes warmed, and for the first time that night, or morning, she let herself smile. We shared a gentle, lingering embrace by the door before I left, the weight of it carrying more than words ever could. As I stepped outside into the golden light of a new day, I knew that what had happened between us wasn't an ending. It was the quiet beginning of something neither of us could ignore.